Do the weather or something.
The what?
Do the weather or do something.
And so the weather here in Los Angeles is cloudy, overcast, and rainy. And it is projected to be that for the next 4 days.
Good. We're in the middle of a meeting. Is there any way I can give you a call back?
All right, we'll start in a few, 1 more minute, get underway. I'm actually waiting for our keynote guest to arrive back from his water run, Michael Brown. Oh, Michael, I don't see you.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. All right, let's get started. To our local councils throughout the country, welcome to our second in a two-part conversation about the administrative and financial infrastructure for Emerald Cities. Yesterday, we talked about how to organize ourselves between national and local in a way that would be more productive and more effective. Our hope is the idea of a charter agreement with some support and centralized functions would aid the local council efforts. Today, we'll be talking about fund development. Myself, Steve Jenkins, as well as Kevin Warner, will present key elements of our fund development strategy. Our goal is to present to you our ideas and to get your agreement about the strategy moving forward. And we also have a guest presenter today, Michael Brown from the Seattle Foundation. For the next 2 to 3 years. Objective 1 is to diversify our sources of revenue to include at least 50% earned revenue by 2015. And then the second objective is to increase the self-sufficiency of you, our local councils, by raising local revenue, earned and unrevenue sources of revenue, to 35% in 2013. So today, what we wanted to do is to figure out how we get there. And the first purpose of today's training objective is to initiate an Emerald Cities joint fund development strategy. Second, to identify and initiate a community foundation and local funding strategy. So we'll really talk about a very particular strategy around partnering with your local community foundation. Then we'll talk about Emerald City's current sources and uses of revenue, and then talk about our proposed revenue model going forward. So given that, what we'd like to do is just talk about our particular strategy around building a relationship between Emerald Cities at the local level and your local community foundations. And to help us in this conversation is Michael Brown. Michael Brown is the Vice President of Community Leadership at the Seattle Foundation. He oversees the Foundation's community leadership activities, its grant-making initiatives, and convening activities. He also leads the Foundation's economic opportunity efforts. Michael is a very key, and as President Norm Rice, the Seattle Foundation is a very important strategic partner in the efforts of Emerald City, Seattle. They serve on the steering committee of their local council. They have made a significant investment of, I think, $150,000 in grant funds to local city council there in Seattle. And I think have just contributed some mission or investment capital in a loan fund for this effort. So without further ado, I'd like to present Michael, and he's a good example of the kinds of partnerships we hope to put into effect in cities across the Emerald Cities platform. Michael Brown.
Thanks, Denise, and thank you all for taking some time out today to chat, or at least listening to me, and hopefully you'll have some questions and we'll be able to engage in more of a discussion this afternoon. So I'm going to do a kind of a basic primer or community foundation 101 for folks. And many of you may know a bit about community foundations, but it's probably a good way to provide some base level info so that we all have the same information. So the Seattle Foundation is a community foundation. The Seattle Foundation's been in existence since 1946, so for about 66 years, we've had a presence in the greater Seattle area. 1946, 66 years is a long time, but the first community foundation, which is the Cleveland Foundation, was formed in 1914, so almost 100 years ago. So when you think about the length of time community foundations have been in existence, I mean, we're really talking a century, and there are community foundations in every community across this country. Big cities, Los Angeles, Seattle, New York, Boston, but then in rural parts of our communities as well. And that's probably the most defining nature of a community foundation, is that we exist to serve our community. There's some geographical boundary that we operate with, that we utilize our resources to support. And it makes us a bit different from a corporate foundation that may have a national scope, or a family foundation, which is run by members of a family. A community foundation, the best way of thinking about a community foundation is that we're made up of many small foundations. So individuals with a philanthropic intent, a charitable intent, establish a donor advisor fund at the foundation. And those donor advised funds are really kind of a charitable checking account for that individual and or family, so that they can give to organizations in the community aligned with their interests. So for every community foundation, there is this donor advised vehicle. And on the East Coast, the East Coast Community Foundations who have been around for a longer period of time, percentage-wise, there are fewer of those donor advised funds. For West Coast Community Foundations, since we tend to be a bit younger, there are more donor advised funds at that community foundation, and that's an important piece I'll come back to later. So, but the donor advised fund vehicle is the way that we engage individuals to become a part of our extended family. And then we use our knowledge of community issues and knowledge of philanthropic strategies to address issues within our community, be it housing, basic needs, education, the environment, whatever. We share that information with our donors so that they can be more strategic, more tactical in how they support organizations in their community. But community foundations also have their own discretionary source of funding that they use to support nonprofit organizations that align with the community foundation strategy. So using the Seattle Foundation as the example, as of today, our asset base is $650 million. Last year, we granted over $60 million to support nonprofits in the community. Of that $60 million, $55 million came from our donors. $5 million came out of our discretionary pot. So you see that heavy weight that I mentioned about the donor advised fund coming from our donors. Other community foundations, that number would be flipped. Cleveland Foundation, their asset base is over $1 billion. The vast majority of their dollars are at their discretion, smaller amount from their donor advised fund. So for community foundations, they're going to operate a little differently in terms of how they grant dollars out to support the community. Some are going to really work hard to engage their donors as partners to fund alongside of them, which is the Seattle Foundation model. And other community foundations are going to utilize their discretionary dollars to drive a particular agenda and then invite donors to join them in that endeavor. So that is kind of an important piece to understand. Every community foundation is going to operate differently, but core to our mission is improving quality of life in the communities in which we operate. So then the role of a community foundation has changed over the years. When the field first started out, we were really stewards of funding. I mean, really, I think it's safe to say that community foundations functioned as kind of a bank, as a savings and loans. So we invested very carefully those assets. We really worked to support that donor's interests, and we're very, I think, exhibited very quiet leadership in the community. But over the past 15 to 20 years, the community foundation field has changed and changed dramatically. There's some effort from community foundations to step more into a leadership role. They realized that there was an ability to speak with authority, speak with a voice in order to galvanize the community, the public sector, so city and county government, the private sector, other philanthropic partners, and donors around issues that were of utmost importance to the community. And what we've seen over the past 15 or 20 years are community foundations really stepping into a more visible and vocal leadership role. Many examples of that, the Minneapolis Foundation, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the Boston Foundation, have all utilized their role as a community leader to step out on issues that I wouldn't say were controversial, but issues that they really felt the community needed to come together around. Immigrant integration, policy and advocacy efforts around the impact of public sector budget cuts on human services and education. Some of our colleagues are actually playing a role in their state capitals by lobbying on behalf of sound public policy that supports the community. This leadership role also has pushed community foundations to play more of a convener role, bringing people around a table together to help move towards more impactful change. It's something that a foundation can't do on its own. Reaching into the community and bringing other stakeholders along to really move the needle on particular issues. And that's a role that sometimes gets understated, that the role of the community foundation as a convener. Once again, going back to the voice that community foundations have as a leader, and frankly, community foundations being seen as a neutral broker, as that really safe place for conversations to be had and strategies to be developed and problems to be solved. Community foundations really have figured out how to play that role. And using the example of the Seattle Foundation and our partnership with Emerald Cities, there was a lot of conversation around green jobs, how to create them, but then also how to address some of the financing and other efforts that would lead to that, lead to the creation of green jobs. So the Seattle Foundation partnered with the City of Seattle to convene this broader table of labor, community colleges, community-based organizations around efforts that many others were doing, and could we bring some coordinated approach and a coordinated agenda around that issue so that we could do something greater than what we're doing on our own. There are many other examples of how community foundations play that role. And then another role that community foundations play, of course, is that grant-making role. I mean, we are a funder, and we do utilize our resources to support nonprofit organizations. As with any funder, their priorities are going to be different in every institution. There are some funders who are really focused on providing general operating support, working capital to help build an organization's capacity to do the type of programming that they're really good at doing. There are other funders, other community foundations who will support programs. They're, restrict funding to support a particular program and maybe not focus so much on that working capital general operating piece. But regardless of where that community foundation falls, the fact that their finger is on the pulse of the community really makes a grant or a partnership with a community foundation. It really provides that good housekeeping seal to a nonprofit organization. So if you've been able to make it through the due diligence of a community foundation, it does start to open the door to other funders in that community. One of the conversations that we have a lot with our philanthropic colleagues in this city is that a Seattle Foundation grant is really kind of the gold seal. So it helps a Gates Foundation, a Boeing, a Microsoft know that when an organization has come through the community foundation's door, that they can vet it, and that it makes it more, it provides a greater opportunity for that organization to approach another funder and potentially secure funding. So, the importance of being able to build that relationship with your local community foundation is really important. And even if they're not able to serve as a funder, once again, the role they play as a convener and as a broker, they can also help open the door to other funders. The community foundation really, regardless of community, tends to be in the middle of a lot of funder collaborations and efforts. So, and we like to think of ourselves as being able to facilitate connections between organizations and issues and projects with other resources. So I think there, if you haven't been able to build that relationship with your community foundation, there are many good reasons to do so because of the role that they play within the community. And the final role that community foundations play and are starting to play a bit more of is around community engagement. I think it's safe to say a very fair critique of foundations is that foundations tended to operate in the ivory tower and make decisions without reaching out into the community to understand what those issues really are. Once again, I think community foundations have been at the forefront of really trying to engage their nonprofit partners and the community at large around a better understanding what's happening on the ground and using that information to guide strategy and grant-making development. How this plays out in other efforts, and once again, utilizing Emerald Cities as an example, is the partnership of community-based organizations that are working in low-income communities and communities of color, and really hearing from those stakeholders about the issues that are really important to them was really helpful for us at the Seattle Foundation as we came around the Emerald Cities table. We've made a lot of investments in economic development, workforce development, environmental stewardship, and relied on our nonprofit partners to give us a lot of important information. But hearing from organizations that were really engaging hard-to-serve communities or communities that were really underrepresented, and getting that perspective of and nuance of what community members really saw as important and key really helped inform some of our approaches in how we would fund workforce development or supportive services tied to that. It also reminded us about the importance of funding the community engagement activities of our nonprofit partners. So, there's an ongoing evolution of this field of community foundations and how they really are for the community and how we reach out to underrepresented communities and make sure that their voices, their perspectives are being incorporated into our decision-making process. And I think you'll see across the country numerous community foundations are playing that role, and we're funding that type of work because it's really important, and it really does help us move towards our overarching mission, and that is to improve quality of life for those that we serve. So I think for the past 20 minutes I've been yapping, and happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Maybe I can just start with the basic question is, what's the best strategy for approaching a foundation, a community foundation in these different local markets?
I know this is going to sound this is going to sound easier than it really is, but the best approach is really to pick up the phone and call that community foundation, or if you don't have those relationships, utilize existing relationships that you do have of those who have relationships at the community foundation. Every foundation is different. There are some funders who are very resistant to getting that phone call and making themselves available, but the vast majority of funders are. I think we all recognize as grant makers, we work as much for our community, for our nonprofit partners, as we do for the institution that pays us. So the only way we're able to be successful is by understanding what's really going on in the community and making ourselves accessible so that we can find that information out. So if you have relationships, pick up the phone and call. If you don't have a relationship directly with that community foundation, chances are you have a relationship with an existing funder or another nonprofit that has a relationship with that community foundation, and basically use some of those relationships to create that access.
Any other questions? If you're on mute, just unmute yourself and go at it.
This is Casey. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. I'm curious, how prepared we have to be with a specific ask when we approach a community foundation, or whether they're willing to sort of develop the proposal together.
That's a great question, and I think you're going to find a mix, but the majority will be very happy to sit down with you and kind of talk through that with you. I don't think you need to come in very prepared. This is, here's the project from A to Z. I think really a lot of this is relationship building. So it's really that initial meeting, I think is just, you get to really get to know the funder and frankly, have that funder get to know you. I do think that there's a very strong mission match between a community foundation and Emerald Cities. I mean, the work that Emerald Cities is doing around community engagement, community building, economic development, workforce development, environmental stewardship, retrofit. I mean, you know, any of those can easily align with a strategy or a priority of that funder, of that community foundation. So I would really use that initial meeting to really sit down and get to know that funder. What are their priorities? You know, how do they fund? What do they like to see? But also using that as an opportunity as well to tell a bit more about the story of Emerald Cities and why, you know, you think it's a good fit with that community foundation.
And I would suggest, in adding thoughts here, is that maybe that initial meeting is just to engage your community foundation in the local council, and so to have them contribute their intellectual capital initially and be able to become a strategic partner long term to see about how to grow the vision, how to co-create the vision, and then how to grow it over time. So maybe your first meeting is not about the ask. In fact, in my day, I always figure that unsolicited proposals never go very far. It's only after you sort of engage folks and, as Michael talked about, find out what it is they're interested in, what they fund, at what level do they fund, you really begin to put pen to paper. But even having them a part of your team and playing the role that Michael talked about as convener is an essential, a very critical role, and we appreciate that role that the Seattle Foundation is playing in the Seattle community.
Well, and just really quickly want to follow up on Denise's comment, and once again, recapping the Seattle Foundation's relationship with Emerald City, Seattle, very right on target. So we were, you know, we played this convener role and became a member of the council, and still remain a member of the local council. And it wasn't until later that we then made our initial investment, and actually it was a multi-year investment, in Emerald City, Seattle, because we're around that table, we saw the vision, we believed in the vision, and then our investment in Emerald City, Seattle was meant to help carry that work forward.
And it's actually then grown, if I understand, that you've now invested in the revolving loan fund, so you continue to be a partner in building out the strategy.
Yes, I mean, this past spring, the foundation, and once again, a lot of this work has come out of the work that we've done with Emerald City, Seattle. One of the things that we knew was a significant, or both a challenge and an opportunity, was getting the market to respond. So working with a number of other partners in the region, we just made a $1 million program-related investment into a loan fund that's meant to simulate commercial building retrofits and hence support job creation that's tied to a community workforce agreement. We also made the investment because right now the geographical intent of that initial investment is downtown Seattle, but we also know that there's the opportunity to scale that effort into other parts of the region in which we fund, and then also with other utilities. So we're really excited about this investment and feel that it's another great way for us to leverage our work with Emerald City.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank Michael. And Michael, I'm sure there are more questions than we have time right now, but be certain that Michael has agreed to work with us as we build out a community foundation strategy in each of these markets and to provide us with some strategic ideas about how to do that. He's already done that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Michael, I want to say thank you and thank you to the Seattle Foundation, and look forward to working with you further in the future.
Thank you.
So what we like to do right now, and probably as a way to segue this, we are really looking to, I'm sure where this is on the slide, but we really want to talk about a strategy to help you each develop a partnership with your local community foundation. One thing that we'll be talking about is how we at the national level can help you do that. Michael has suggested, and we have already started a process of presenting the Emerald City story to the Community Foundation Conference, which I think is going to be held in New Orleans in September. So we will have a conversation with not just your foundation partners, but also throughout the United States to see how we can engage all the community foundations in the Emerald City vision. So we'll talk a little bit about this over time, but we wanted to, one of the things that Michael did suggest is that you each begin the conversation first, one-on-one conversations with your local community foundation representatives, so as a precursor to us holding a conference event in September. So what I'd like to do now is to turn this over to Steve Jenkins, and what we'd like to do is to share with you our overall strategy. We've talked about local foundation strategy, but we'll come back to that. What's our overall strategy to meet our goals, which is to diversify and expand the revenue stream for both national and local operations to ensure our sustainability going forward. So with that, I'll ask Stephen to step in.
Okay. And Michael, if you want to chime in at any time, please do, if you're able to stay on the call. So the slide you see in front of you is basically, I just wanted to get you familiar with the names of some of the funders of Emerald Cities here nationally. So Rockefeller, Cerna, Candida, Annie Casey, Joyce, Kresge, Nathan Cummings, Living Cities, Atlantic Philanthropies. Those are all funders that helped us get to where we are today. So from the beginning until now, they're not all funding us at this moment, but in fact they all have funded us from the beginning to now. So I just wanted to kind of put those names out there. As you hear us talking about these particular funders, you'll know why we're talking about them. And so none of us would really be here without these guys. The grants that we've given to the cities that we have come through these grants that we've got. Down below that is a list of other folks that Denise is in conversation with as we speak about different things, different projects here and there. So again, as we meet new funders and talk to them about different projects, we'll let you know who they are, because we want to make sure that we're all working collaboratively and we're not stepping on each other trying to do the same job. A lot of you probably know all this, but basically just kind of give you a basic idea of what all of our fundraising efforts pay for. And really, most of the fundraising we do is intended to get out into the field at some point. Okay, pays for national staff and infrastructure, which in the beginning we did spend some money there, but we pretty much have an infrastructure now, and we'll be building that out a little as we go. But for the most part, you know, we have the planning grants, operating grants, technical assistance as we start to identify those things, capacity building, all those conferences you guys came to last year and this webinar today, and then obviously new business and product development. But this is just to kind of show that we want to try and keep a lean and mean national staff and support the efforts to get a lot of the money that we are able to fundraise out to the field to you. Okay, this slide is probably not totally accurate, but its intent is a good one. And what I'm trying to show here is currently this may be the way things look out there. And so we think in Oakland and San Francisco that, you know, we give operating grants there, which pretty much represents probably about 80% of their revenue, and then they have some other money coming in, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is there are some local councils who are getting some local revenue. Seattle, obviously, is a big one. You know, they're $150,000. The national grant represents a small part of their revenue. Pretty much on the bottom, everyone else, they're kind of right now all relying on Emerald City's national grants. And so it kind of gives you a picture of we have to, really support you guys out to do some fundraising, and we intend to do that. And it kind of gives you, it's not totally accurate, but a decent picture of where we are today. And again, while we don't know exactly everything you're spending the money on, these are the kinds of things that obviously we believe you either are or will be in the future. There may be some technical assistance that you would pay for yourself as opposed to asking us to pay for. Obviously, the local director and any other project staff that may come along in the future, new business development, special initiatives. This is the Emerald City's revenue model. Okay, per the business plan that we've had done for us about a year and a half ago, I'd say, for next year, we are supposed to be having 53% earned revenue, 47% unearned revenue. Just for those of you who might not know what that really means, unearned revenue basically is private and government grants. We don't happen to have any government grants right now, but if we include that. So a grant-making process is going to be unearned. And typically earned revenue is going to be awarded to you via some sort of contract or agreement. So, for instance, on the government side, you might get a grant, but you also might get a contract for providing them services, in which case there it's going to be earned revenue on the contract side. On the grant side, it's going to be unearned revenue. So the top circle shows where we were supposed to be at this point. The bottom circle shows where we are. And as you can see, we're primarily funded through unearned revenue, which is all those nice grant makers, that list I showed you earlier. The reason for that is because we don't have a whole lot of projects going on, so there's really not any place to make earned revenue. And so now the projects are starting to align, they're starting to line up. Again, we're going to have to start working together to come up with revenue models to fill in half of that circle. So our goal going forward is to catch up with that last slide, and we'd like to, by between 2013 and 2015, to get up to 50% earned and 50% unearned revenue. At the same time, we want to also support you all in the field to start supporting yourself a little more with local money. And so for 2013, we want to put a goal out there to get, as Denise had mentioned earlier in the presentation, to get your locally raised revenue up to 35%, whether for 2013, and then we're projecting it out over into 2015. If you look at that last bar, that's at 67%, and that's pretty much where Seattle is right now. So if they continue their operations the way they are, they've already attained that 2015 goal, and that's where we want all of you to be at some point. Again, this is just a very generic slide here saying, in order to get this done, guys, we got to support each other. We intend to support you. We're going to need your support as far as national funders. Obviously, we're going to be the contact with most of the national funders. We're going to support you any way we can, and with your local community foundations and our other local funders. And this slide basically says what Denise was just talking about earlier. We are organizing an event at the Council of Foundations Conference in September. We're going to work with you guys between now and then. If you're having trouble identifying your local community foundations and local funders, we'll help you do that. We will do what we can to get to the right contacts if you don't have them, to get through those doors. We'll participate in any meetings you'd like us to. If you'd like us to, if it's appropriate, we'd be there with you. No problem, we will do that. And we just want to make sure that between now and September, there's that relationship building phase starts. And in order to do that, we're going to need to have an inventory, or you're going to need to have an inventory of your local funders to know who to call and where to start. And we can try to help you do that as well. The goal then is in September is to meet with community foundations from all 10 cities. At this point, I'm going to stop to see if there's any questions. This is basically just a summary of what we talked about earlier. Any questions?
Kind of loud, but can you hear me, Steve? It's Casey.
Yes, Casey.
Hey, so I'm curious, I know that there are some matching opportunities with some of the national funders, and I'm just curious if you're going to provide us more detailed information on those kinds of opportunities.
We can. We'll look into that, and we'll certainly do that if we can.
Okay. And another question, you mentioned so you're coming up with this local community foundation strategy. Will there be some sort of roadmap or plan coming from the national office, or it's really driven city by city?
Well, first of all, what I'd like to do is just begin to have conversations with you. Many of you already have relationships with your community foundations, and your entry point into sort of this next round or how to engage them in a partnership really depends on what kind of relationships you currently have, what the priorities of those local foundations are. So we will have to work with you one-on-one and make those strategies very relevant and specific to each local site. But having said that, we will still sort of lay out a timeline, some messaging points or pitch strategies for each of the foundations. I think you heard a little bit from Michael about the particular value, at least he's emphasized to us, of community engagement as a particular area of work that they could fund going forward. Many of them are currently, I know Cleveland Foundation, looking at program-related investments for loan funds. So we really do want to tailor this to the local market.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to turn the discussion over to Kevin Warner now, who's going to talk about earned revenue models.
Well, hello everyone. I miss seeing your smiling faces at our get-togethers, and this is a little bit unfair because you can see me, but I can't see you. So I feel like I'm a little bit on stage, but I wanted to today present to you a little bit of thought and strategy behind the earned revenue potential of what we do. And in order to do that, I want to try to break apart this notion of what earned revenue really means, how it's derived, and then put back together the component pieces of the puzzle to help you think strategically about how earned revenue potential in what you do in your local markets is an opportunity. So this first slide that you're looking at now is really just, it's a conceptual graphic, but it really breaks apart what earned revenue means and how it might be derived. If you look at it from left to right and over time, the kind of energy efficiency and sustainability projects that we might be involved in our local markets have a certain baseline value, and that baseline value is often derived from just the savings in energy costs. Over time, and as you add different value propositions to the equation, you see that the value, the overall value, grows. So you may add to that reduced operating costs because you reinvest in your building, and therefore you don't have to continually reinvest in new equipment. You add value because as an owner you may be achieving a lower greenhouse gas footprint, and that might be valuable to you in terms of marketing your space or achieving certain mandates. You're definitely investing in local job creation and local fiscal economic development multipliers. So as a community or as a city, you're actually reaping some of the benefit of your investment because some of that value is coming back into the community. And if you're a city, obviously it builds up your fiscal revenues in terms of tax base and other things that flow to the municipality. Through community participation, there's value created because the community is involved in the decision-making process and actually has some equity in the project by its participation. And there may in fact be, in some cases, revenues that are derived from energy generation in certain projects. And these are not an exhaustive list of value propositions, but they do represent many of the core aspects of what Emerald City's value proposition is. So you see, as you add each one of these values to the curve, the whole value, the total value of an investment grows. And if you look at this in terms of baseline return on investment, that blue wedge, that would sort of traditionally be earned by the capital investors, the bank or the private equity or the owner that invests their capital into the project, and that would be, that represents their return. And then the two green wedges really are what we like to call the enhanced value. The things that wouldn't happen but for the involvement of you, of the Emerald Cities team. And so the light green really represents that enhanced value over time to these other stakeholders, the community, the workforce, the city, other stakeholders in these projects. And the dark green, or the emerald green, really represents that portion of that enhanced value that could potentially flow to Emerald Cities because you are doing something to actually obtain that value for your partners. And you may get that earned revenue through fees for a service you provide, which is actually the earning part of the revenue potential. But there may also be an alignment of interest. So for example, you may have success dividends. If the project achieves a certain level of job creation or a certain level of footprint reduction, you may negotiate with your partners an incremental increase in the revenue that you achieve from that project. So again, this is a conceptual idea, but you can see the more you add in terms of value proposition, the more things you do to create that value for your partners and the stakeholders, the more potential there is for you to actually achieve value in that project. So we've broken the concept apart, but what does that mean in terms of what we do every day? This is a matrix. Again, it's not meant to be all-inclusive and exhaustive, but it's a matrix of a projected value chain and the sort of the what, the who, and the how of that value proposition that Emerald Cities brings to a project. So across the top, again, you see sort of this baseline moving from left to right. The first tranche of value might be the energy and the operating savings of the building. The second tranche might be the community and the jobs and the economic multiplier benefits. The third might be the environmental benefits. The fourth might be the generation benefits of the on-site energy. Again, these can be mixed and matched depending on what the actual project is. Down the left-hand side, you see sort of the next group down is the value potential. What is the value under each one of these columns? Followed by sort of the potential capital sources. Again, it's not meant to be all-inclusive. There are many capital sources, and each project has its own unique blend. What is the structure after that? How do you get to that value? Who are the stakeholders at play? And then lastly, the blue the blue squares at the bottom talk about the earned revenue potential and the role potential of the local Emerald Cities team. So if you look at this, I'm not going to go through every one of these, but if you look at this sort of, again, as a three-dimensional model, let's start in the upper left-hand corner under energy and operating savings, value potential. Obviously, the value potential is you reducing your cost to operate a building because you don't have to pay so much for energy. You have budget predictability as an owner. That's incredibly valuable to you. If you know what your utility costs are going to be, you can budget around that, and that's less risky as an owner. You can redirect savings into other investments, which is incredibly valuable. That's the opportunity cost of capital value that's created by lowering the cost of the energy used in the building. And finally, because you're investing or reinvesting in your building infrastructure, the cost of operating that infrastructure over time goes down. Building owners like to call that CapEx. How much do you have to put away into the piggy bank every month because you know you're eventually going to have to replace that boiler. But if you have a brand new boiler that's more efficient, not only do you have to put less into the piggy bank for your CapEx, but your boiler operates at a lower cost. So you can see how the owner might really benefit from this. How does the community benefit? Well, you know, local workforce development. Obviously, we talked about the benefits to a city through the local economic development multipliers in terms of more tax base, more income, more reinvestment. You can see that all of the players in the equation have something to gain by participating and therefore investing in these projects. But the real opportunity for Emerald Cities is to coordinate all these efforts and to add in these additional incremental or enhanced value propositions that may not occur but for our involvement. We've heard this time and again in talking to various stakeholders in some of your local markets where you know, a local government director of sustainability says, gosh, you know, we're really focused on the economic benefits to the city or the county, but we've never really thought about how to integrate the community benefits or the local workforce development benefits. Gee, we'd really like to have help doing that. Same thing with building owners, particularly with downtown groups or groups of owners who have a vested interest in seeing the local economy be healthy and stable and sustainable. They've said to us, gosh, you know, we know how to do our buildings, but we really need to tie them all together so that the greater benefit flows to the community, and we're actually investing in our own marketplace and our own well-being by doing that. So you can see that this three-dimensional model starts to come together when you factor in all the different stakeholders that you all work with every day. And the real key here is to figure out how does the Emerald Cities team in your local market tap into those enhanced values, and what do we do, what do you do to bring that to fruition for the other stakeholders in this marketplace. So let's drop down a little bit to the what is the earned revenue potential role of Emerald Cities. We've talked about providing services, but what does that mean? And I know that some of you are already doing this and talking about doing this. We heard yesterday, for example, Casey in Portland, you've got a project coming online where it's not a lot of revenue potential, but if you think about the multiplier of doing, I think you said it was $15,000 to do some workforce value enhancement on that project, if you think about doing 10 of those, that's all of a sudden $150,000 or greater. If you think about multiplying that across bigger stakeholder groups and not just one project, all of a sudden it becomes a much larger value proposition. Avni, I know you're doing the similar work in San Francisco, working off of the CWA work that you did for Mission Housing and now expanding that not only to Mission Housing Phase 2, but to community college and housing authority and other stakeholders that you're working with. So some of you are already out there developing your value proposition. And the trick now is to figure out how to programmatically enhance that so it's not just one project at one time, but to make it bigger and more robust. And that's what Steve was talking about earlier, how national can feed what you're doing to build your capacity. And it's also what Michael was talking about, how you can partner with your local foundation stakeholders to help build that capacity and to make your footprint much larger. So again, the role of Emerald Cities in this enhanced value, earned revenue potential model could be project management. It could be bringing subject matter experts through technical assistance. It could be in helping local communities or cities or owners groups actually package their proposals to investors where the incremental benefits to the community and the workforce become more robust and therefore more attractive to mission capital and social capital and public sector capital that is becoming you know, a lot less available in this economy, but is still very interested in investing in high impact propositions. So what does all this mean? How do you really model this? How do you apply some real life numbers to this? So this table really takes, or this matrix takes what you just saw in concept and applies some round dollars to it. Again, it's not a real project. You can plug in the numbers and actually see how it works. And then the table below gives you a relative matrix of, you know, how much of a share of value, if you were to, you know, apply it formulaically, how much of a share of value of a project translates into earned revenue. So here's a theoretical, again, a theoretical spectrum of value where you've got a program that has $1 million of investment in energy and operating savings, $200,000 in community and economic development investment, $100,000 in greenhouse gas benefits, and $2 million because it's a big project with a big rooftop and has all sorts of great benefits and on-site generation. Again, you can mix and match the numbers, but I want you to see how sensitive the model is. So the second line is the total value, or the cumulative value. As you can see, you can go from $1 million to $3.3 million fairly quickly by adding these incremental enhanced components. And if you drop down into the table below, what you see is across the top, the range of values from $1 million to $3.3 million, and across the left-hand side, a percentage of that value. And what does that mean in terms of earned revenue? So at the very smallest, you know, 0.25% of the $1 million is only $2,500. It's not a lot of money. But if you drop down to 3%, all of a sudden it's $30,000. And if you take that 3% all the way across to this full robust project with $3.3 million of value, it's all of a sudden just shy of $100,000. So you can see the potential power of adding incremental value to projects, because every time you add another value component, you potentially have another avenue, another channel for earned revenue. And when you add all those channels together, it can be very robust and very compelling. So that gives you an idea both in theory and in practice how you can apply this earned revenue potential model. Obviously, it's different for everybody and what you're doing and the projects you're doing. But one thing I want to leave you with is that it's really, really critical to go from thinking about one small project to thinking about a larger platform where you can apply these kinds of services and value propositions across a big pool. Because the bigger the pool the bigger that the pool gets, the larger the potential for your own revenue gets. So I think we're going to open up to some questions, but I also wanted to turn it back to Denise to if there are any closing comments or wrap it up. And then we have a few minutes left, I think, for Q&A. Yeah.
Can you hear me, Kevin?
Yes, I can, Casey.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts about sort of matching, applying this earned revenue potential to a larger platform and also building the capacity to actually perform those services on a larger platform, because it's sort of a, catch-22, which step do you take first? Because I imagine we would need more staff capacity in order to truly do it at a larger scale.
Well, certainly as a point of entry, the technical assistance model is the way to start. And some of your colleagues in a couple of cities have already started that process. OVNI in San Francisco has now secured some TA funding from us to prime the pump, if you will, on 3 projects. Tara is working now on preparing a scope of work for a TA request in Oakland. And again, these are matched to specific projects. So as you have specific projects coming online, we want you to come to us with proposals for technical assistance funding. Obviously, we can't fund everything you need, but we can prime the pump and then work with you to secure whatever else you need to take that project all the way through to completion. And that's where the integration and interaction with your local funders becomes extremely important. So if you think about our TA program as really seed capital for growing that capacity and then building from there, I think that's a pathway to getting what you want. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, negotiating the earned revenue potential, is tricky business, and part of the magic of doing that is knowing how much value you really bring. So it may be that part of your technical assistance funding from us is to help you quantify the value that you are bringing, and we have in our technical assistance pool a number of subject matter experts on that on those topics of how you quantify the value being created, which then helps you to negotiate your participation in these projects.
And this relates to that question I had when we were talking about ESCOs and trying to carve out sort of a value added and earned revenue as part of their model, working with them.
Absolutely. I mean, ESCOs or any other partners or stakeholders certainly have a lot of value potentially to gain by working with Emerald Cities. If you think about it, any contractor, they're going to spend money trying to get a project, and the projects they don't get are potentially lost revenue to them. So by working with Emerald Cities, if contractors or other stakeholders can get actual business, that's worth something to them. And they should be helping support Emerald Cities because Emerald Cities is helping them get business. And that's the basic business proposition in this model. Lizette, do you have a question?
Actually, no, I did not. Did I?
You're just thinking about it.
Well, I think one thing that I was actually just writing about was it definitely struck me what you said about getting the help in formulating the value proposition of what we're dealing with here in LA, which is kind of pretty grand in scope right now, potentially. So I'll be giving you a call about that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a little bit. We talked about the difference between grants and earned revenue. I don't think it's a bright line necessarily, because grants could also be considered earned revenue. So, for example, if there's a grant from out there potentially from the Public Utilities Commission to put together a new program, and Emerald Cities is a partner with someone like Lizette, what you're doing in Los Angeles right now, you're going to be providing a service, and basically your share of that grant funding is a fee-for-service model, because you're doing something for that money. It's not just, you know, sort of a general operating grant. Avni?
Yes. I just had a quick question. You're smiling. I see that
I love to hear your questions. You know that.
So you have these percentage points listed vertically, and my question was, how do they add up? And you know, is there a specific percentage we're shooting for at the outset, and is 3% the max that we can charge to, you know, as revenue from a project per se? That was one part of my question. And the other part was, does this added revenue flow only to the local council, or is it in some way tied to national Emerald Cities?
Well, so the first part of your question is this a range? And the answer is no. This is a sensitivity table just to show you the power of compounding effectively. You know, we don't want to be too greedy because we want to make sure that we are good partners. But there are a number of consultants out there now that I know who charge anywhere in the 3 to 5% range, but they may be doing a lot of work for that 3 to 5%. The other way to look at this is that you may have a baseline percentage of a project and then a success percentage. So theoretically, you can negotiate, you know, a 3% base, but if the project achieves a greater than certain amount of savings or a greater than certain amount of outcomes, that you would get an additional incremental, you know, revenue from that because you've exceeded the baseline. That's very typical in business and very typical in the energy markets. So you can mix and match different components of baseline and you know, outcome revenue. And then, yeah, I mean, the size of the project depends. The bigger the project, the smaller the percentage, and such and such. So, but I wanted you to see in this sensitivity table, you know, what it means to have a percent of something based on the size of the project, what it means to have 3%, because it does give you a visual, you know, it gives you visual feedback on how this might work. And then with regard to the split between local and national, I think that the concept is, to the extent that national is providing a value-added service, that we would share in the revenue potential. But that's really to be negotiated between the local and the national staff, because we're investing in you, and obviously we've got to keep ourselves going. But our outcome, our success is based on your success. So we want to feed you as much as we can and still keep ourselves going. That's an end-around answer to a very straightforward question. The answer is we have to negotiate that over time, but the idea is that there ought to be some revenue sharing because we're providing something to you to support what you're doing.
Got it. Thanks very much. And I really love the visualization. It really helps me get a grasp of the various layers of value added.
Great. Thank you. I'm glad it's helpful. Any other questions? I know we're starting to lose people. We've gone a little bit over our time. Yes. Taylor wants me to remind you that you can use your chat feature if your microphone is not working. Well, we're not getting any other questions, so we're going to end the session now, but I wanted to thank all of you again. I know 2 days in a row. Oh, did we get a question? Okay. Absolutely. Thank you again for joining us today. It's good to have this interaction, and obviously there are going to be a lot of follow-up questions, so feel free to contact any and all of us. We're here to support what you're doing. Oh, we have a question. One last question from our colleague in Oakland, Tara.
She says, how do public entities who have strong transparency and accountability mandates allow for this earned revenue on the back end?
Great question. So it really depends on how that jurisdiction operates, both by policy and by regulation. And it will be different for every jurisdiction. But Tara, I can tell you that there are ways to structure participations on performance-based contracting. So we have to look into that depending on who you're talking about. But I do know that there are public procurement policies that do allow for that. We just have to understand exactly what they are and who you're dealing with. But it's not going to be acceptable for everybody as a matter of course. So we just have to sort of look at each project differently and understand all of the different buttons. Well, there is, we could have another webinar. That's actually a great idea. We'll have to put together another webinar on how you run through public procurement processes as a not-for-profit, because they are very unique. And one of the propositions I know that some of you have heard me talk about is the sole source unsolicited offer process, whereby Emerald Cities could, in theory, be offered a non-competitive contract with a government entity because our proposition is so unique that it couldn't be replicated if that entity had gone out to a public bidding process. And that's something that we're sort of pursuing with a couple of jurisdictions right now. So as we learn the process and the ropes around that, we'll put together a learning session around that to help everybody. But it's a great question, Tara, and I wish I could give you a firm, this is the way it's done. Unfortunately, it varies quite a bit. So with that, we're going to sign off. I want to thank you all again on behalf of all the national staff for your time and participation today. I hope it's been useful for you, and please follow up with any of us with questions that you might have. At the end, as you sign off, there will be a survey that comes up. We really would appreciate your feedback. It helps us in developing our programming for the future. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great day.